All right. Good morning, everybody. I see it's a little bit of a slow start this morning, but the room's filling up nicely. Either people thought my speech would be boring and they would miss it, in which case you would be disappointed because they pushed my speech back half an hour. It could also be that the parties last night were really good, and I was at a wonderful dinner, but I'm sure I missed out on the real partying that was going on at the conference. But nevertheless, great to see everybody here today. This is my first visit to Brazil. Been here less than 24 hours. It's been wonderful. Even in the 24 hours, I've had a chance to visit Embraer, one of the icons of Brazilian industry, and had a chance to see innovation that's happened here in Brazil over a long period of time, and to be a world leader in where they compete in. And so it was very heartening to see that in my time here. What I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about innovation as it's happening in startups and the venture industry globally. And to for industry, as many of you know, in enterprise technology, in consumer businesses, a lot of what's happening in the startup ecosystem has been well covered in the news and a way for us all to see. But a lot of this innovation and the capacity to innovate in this external ecosystem is also coming to industry. So that's why I thought it would be a good topic for all of us to cover today. And hopefully let's see how that goes. So, starting from, let's start from the way a lot of the technology and the innovation has worked in the past. I put names of 3 companies here that are very strong technology companies. And is the audience able to see the slides? I think you're able to see the slides over there, right? Okay. These companies, when you think about them, these companies were what I call purely technology players that were supplying technology into industry, and industry was using them to improve productivity, to automate their processes, to actually make themselves better. And this has been the paradigm for innovation, for adopting technology in industry, and for improving goods and services, how things are made, how things are distributed for a long period of time. And what we're realizing right in front of our eyes is that this paradigm of technology serving industry and then industry absorbing and innovating is changing right before our eyes. What I mean by that is all these industries, which previously were just absorbing technology and getting better, slowly the startups and the innovation that's happening in the external market has gone from being focused on giving technology into industry to really taking over industries. And this is happening globally. And this is an important change in the external innovation ecosystem and a paradigm shift that's important for all of us to understand. So the world is not waiting around for a particular industry to innovate on its own. There's enough capital globally, over $250 billion in capital globally in this external innovation ecosystem, very motivated entrepreneurs, and lots of opportunities and doors open to kind of go in and change the way a particular industry works. And this paradigm shift is very important for us to understand because this is a big opportunity to change the way things are done, whatever industry we are in, but also if you are an incumbent, to really think about not just absorbing technology, but really thinking everything end to end, from how fast you're developing product, what you sell as value, how you go to market, and what business model you actually serve. And it becomes a much bigger problem than just technology to actually thinking about many of these other factors as industries themselves are kind of getting disrupted. So moving on then, one of the concepts that many of you might have learned about is this concept of unicorns, which is billion-dollar valuation companies that have been created through this entrepreneurial ecosystem. And this over the last 10 years, this has been a pretty amazing phenomenon of companies starting from scratch, and within a very small period of time, 5-6 years, totally starting to define and dominate a category, and not only dominating a category, but be valued in private markets at over $1 billion. And this map kind of gives you a sense for where these unicorns, these private companies with over $1 billion valuations have been created. And Brazil's got one of them in the travel space, as many of you know. But also in the rest of the world, many of these unicorns that we're talking about fit into less of a technology provider paradigm, more of an industry disruptor paradigm. And whether it comes to Uber and ride sharing that we're talking about here, or Airbnb or e-commerce, in each country there are really industry creating and category killing kind of companies, and that's what's kind of creating this phenomenon. And the big takeaway for us as we think about it from an industry perspective is to see that segments of the industry that were previously protected and hadn't been changed for many years, and we thought there were a lot of defenses, there is enough disruptive technology coming and enough capital and entrepreneurs coming to the market that are able to go in and create very, very valuable companies. So to give you a sense of how the world of venture capital and entrepreneurs and innovation has kind of changed, I give you, this slide shows you where this external innovation was maybe in the 1990s. There were about 300 new companies or so formed every year, $3 billion in capital. And as large corporates, there was very little participation by large corporates in this ecosystem. Only about 6% or so of the money that was in this external ecosystem actually came from large corporates. But today, we are in a situation, purely venture capital, it's about $130 billion. There's another 120 or so billion dollars globally that actually comes in from non-traditional players into the ecosystem. And there are thousands of new companies that are coming up, not just, as I said, technology, but trying to take over and disrupt industries. Not all of them are going to be successful, but if you think about the scale, if you think about a large corporate that's playing in the industry space, and you think about how much R&D they spend, even the larger ones spend maybe $2, $3, $4 billion a year, and a large part of that is just to maintain their existing business as opposed to trying to create completely new disruptive businesses and industries. And you think about that scale, a couple of $1 billion type of scale, which is already big and everybody thought was big, to a global industry of over hundreds of billions of dollars trying to go disrupt industries. And that's really the scale of external innovation that's coming up against incumbents and what I would consider the traditional way of doing things. Now, the other phenomenon that I think the paradigm change that's happening as we speak is we are all used to, when a new player comes into a market, they eat into one segment of the market. There were 4 competitors in a segment. One of them was weak. A new player came in, and they fit nicely into that segment. And that, on the left-hand side, is the model of competition we're used to thinking about. And we think about, okay, I'm competing in this space, in this segment. If somebody new comes in, I'm the strongest player here. The weakest player is going to get taken out. But that paradigm, again, with this industry disruption model is kind of things are changed. And, for many of us remember in the mobile phone era, I think there was an article quite recently about the 10 years of the iPhone. If you think of 10 years back, which is not that long ago, you think about who was in the mobile phone industry. Who were the players that had 30%, 40% market share? And if you think 2007, that was the picture on the left-hand side. Somebody might have thought, okay, the iPhone comes in and takes a small 5%, 10% share of that market. And then you take today iPhones and Android and smartphones, that's pretty much taken over the whole category. All the old incumbents are gone. And that could pretty much, from an industry perspective, as things change, you could see winner-take-all kind of players come on because there's a lot of appetite in the private markets, a lot of change and productivity improvements that could take place, and segments could completely, competitors in the segment could completely disappear and new players could show up. And I want to go back to some of the winners. this understanding of industry disruption and people taking over whole categories is creating a dynamic in the market from an acquisition perspective globally. So if you think about when a new category creation player came up, it's like if you take Amazon, or if you took, Facebook bought WhatsApp for $17 billion, and you think about WhatsApp, that was 50 people. I think I even here in Brazil, I noticed everybody uses WhatsApp to communicate. That's kind of taking over a complete category, and when somebody like that takes over a category, an incumbent, in which case Facebook, decided to buy them for $19 billion. You would think that's insane for a 50-person company to be bought out for $19 billion, but and they had practically no revenue. So how do you do the math to say something's worth $19 billion? That's kind of the category, again, going back to this industry disruption category creation paradigm that I'm talking about, is to say when something new comes in and is getting the attention and is starting to own a category, it becomes like the old players completely have a chance to disappear, and some of the incumbents are willing to pay huge valuations to take over the new players. And it's not just the new players like the Googles of the world that are willing to do that, the Facebooks of the world that are trying to do that. I think I picked out 3 other examples of what I would consider very traditional players. Unilever, Walmart, General Motors. When Unilever saw direct-to-consumer online commerce, this company called Dollar Shave Club that was selling razors, they decided to move and bought the company for $1 billion. Self-driving cars, that's kind of becoming a reality, and if a traditional player like General Motors didn't react and build that capability, they could they could become irrelevant in the category. So when a startup called Cruise came up, they bought it for $1 billion, and Cruise had 100 people. It was basically all about the talent and the competency needed to compete in cars for the future, and they moved to kind of buy that kind of company. So when your paradigm shifts from I'm going to think about technology and how I can use it in industry to kind of saying technology could really take over my category and the new player could displace me, then how fast you move and how you make your decisions also changes. The paradigm there changes as well. So now let's talk a little bit about incumbents in industry and some of the things that goes on. And so my experience, I've been here in X47 Siemens for a little less than 6 months, but I've had the chance to work with some really interesting companies in tech, including Hewlett-Packard and Cisco. And I've observed a lot of changes that have kind of gone on in this industry over 20 years. So both from an M&A role, corporate strategy role, as well as making venture investments and working with startups. And this is kind of my observations about what are the things that could stop or inhibit an industry player from really moving when they see an opportunity. And for many of you that have been in large corporates, some of these things might resonate. The first thing I want to talk about is this, what I call technology myopia. And this is the idea that you go in, you say this new product category is kind of created and you want to do something about it. But then inside the company, you might have a feeling, well, that's just AI, that's just IoT, that's just, autonomous driving, that's just robotics. I have a robotics engineer, they can just do it. It's about the technology, nothing else changes for us. But as I mentioned before, you have to think beyond the technology disruption paradigm to really think about industry disruption. And what that means is a lot of different pieces fall into place, from the technology to which markets it goes after, what the business model is, how fast you move to catch the market window. All these things together have to be looked at when you're evaluating an opportunity, not just to say, oh, I can write that code, or I can include that technology in the product that I already offer. And this usually freezes people, I believe, from moving faster than they actually should when an opportunity comes up. The other thing, the disintermediation fear is quite a challenge, especially if you have a long-established business and there's a certain customer that you're actually serving. What happens is your customer may start to become irrelevant, which means that you have to look for new customers or directly go to your end market or your customer's customer. But in a large organization, in an established business model in an industry where you're just serving that customer a certain way, you're selling them equipment, and that's what you've always done. Instead, you may need to just offer the whole thing as a service, but not to an intermediary, but directly to an end customer. And that creates a lot of discomfort in an incumbent, because you may have a channel, you may have an existing customer who may want to prevent you, they may threaten you, they say, hey, if you go directly, then I will not give you business next year. But as you see this disruption happening in the industry, you've got to get through that disintermediation, and that many ways to do that. You could set up a new unit. You could, try it in a different geography than where your main customers are, but you got to get through the disintermediation fear. The other fear that I see in an incumbent when industry disruption comes in is the willingness to invest. I think when you have large steady-state businesses, you're very much trying to be profitable, and every quarter and every year, you're looking for the profits and in your business, in your P&L to come. But many of the new technologies and absorbing them and changing the way you do business requires you to invest. And that means cutting off investment in a traditional business and turning on investment in the new business model. And that sounds easy enough for somebody to stand here and say, but in reality, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with powers, you're dealing with the way financial pressures and delivering to a quarterly, what I would say, earnings target. And this J-curve, the ability to really make room for a new investment and to go and play in a winning manner is an important part of corporate discipline that's required in the times of change. And then the multiple dilemma, multiple dilemma is when you have to acquire in order to change. And as an acquirer, you're stuck, right? I mean, so how do you justify, paying $1 billion for a company if you think they are creating a new category, but that's not actually, making any sense from a revenue multiple? Your company, if you're a public company, your company may be valued at 3-4 times revenue or 10 times earnings, and you may look at the math and go, well, how do I go from here to paying a significantly irrational valuation? And I remember I was having a quote with one of the CEOs, and then from an M&A perspective, and I remember saying, you're trying to make a rational decision about the business today, and there's a rational decision here about staying disciplined on multiples. There's a rational decision here about focusing on the technology. There's a rational decision here about not disintermediating your customer, because these are all may seem short-term rational decisions, but the path to irrelevance when your industry is changing is paved with rational decisions. You make a lot of rational decisions for the short term, but you become irrelevant in the long term, because the cumulative effect of the magnitude of change versus how you need to act to that change really is really irrational if you think about it. And then finally, the competitive frame. I talked about the winner take all. A lot of us in industry, especially established industries that are looking at market share, we look at our traditional competitors. We constantly think about what are they doing, how do we compete against them. We are better than the traditional competitors is usually the way people think about competing. But when industry disruption is happening, your competitor is somebody new. It's not your existing competitor. It's not enough if you just do better than your existing competitor. You're competing against a different model and potentially a different competitor. And I'll go back to the mobile phone industry. It really didn't matter that Nokia was doing better than BlackBerry or BlackBerry was doing better than Nokia. It just, both of them became irrelevant because the competition was different. So I think it's important cumulatively to look at things across these. If you're an incumbent in a large corporate and you're thinking about innovation, you really need to get through all of these things, understand where the industry disruption is coming from, who the new players are, what the opportunities that are opening up, and then get through some of these internal barriers to really get through to the innovation goals that you're thinking about. Okay? So then some of you at this point might say, well, I think this is all the tech industry, that's all consumer. What has this got to do with industry? Right? I mean, we are in the real world. We make and sell physical goods. We do hard things like transportation, logistics, automotive, aeronautics. This is all industry is immune to disruption. Should I really care? Should I worry about these paradigms? Is the competition really going to be that intense and that fast? And so if kind of that's your question. So I mean, this is the industry that I'm in. The rate of change is very predictable. My product life cycles are 5 years, 10 years. I'm the master of my domain. What could change, right? So let's think about that for a second. So the thing that's changing, I believe, and I think earlier, maybe yesterday, there was somebody from Singularity University that was talking about exponential change. But that's really the point here. Even in some of the underlying technologies that are coming into industry are causing digitalization, right? So anything, the sensors are becoming cheaper, the ability to store data about anything is actually becoming extremely cheaper, computing is becoming almost infinite, and these things coming into traditional industries is really causing a rate of change, and these technologies are improving at 100 times or even up to 400 times within a decade. So if you're used to not a lot changing in your product life cycle for 5 years or 10 years, and you make a set of assumptions, you used to make a set of assumptions that are linear, change 3% a year, 5% a year, you're not really taking into account things that could change 100 times or 400 times. So if you're thinking about, and I give you some examples of things technologies that are really getting cheaper, faster, better at an exponential rate. So whether you're thinking about sensors that go into Internet of Things. I was talking to somebody that was in the oil and gas industry the other day. Some of the sensors that they were putting on top of the oil, these oil wells, they were like, the equipment cost like over $5,000 with a basic set of sensors to see, pressure, temperature, and so on. But then what you don't realize is that the same sensor and even better sensors exist in your smartphone, and they're less than $10, right? So you really are thinking about a completely different order of magnitude of the price of sensors in your smartphones going by such a degree because you're shipping in such volumes. When you take that out of the context of a smartphone and apply it in an industrial area, the numbers are just not even in the same ballpark, $5,000 versus $10. And the amount of software that you can write on that to automate, to make the oil, to increase production in the oil well, to reduce downtime, to reduce the number of truck rolls or ship rolls if you're offshore, to actually go service it, could dramatically change if you're able to sensor and put compute close to that. And that's the kind of nonlinear thinking and actual things that could be happening. And it just amazes me when you go into these entrepreneurial ecosystems. I thought, okay, here I am in Siemens. Siemens serves the oil and gas industry, so we know about it. Nobody else in the world knows about it. What the hell does somebody in Silicon Valley know about it? You'll be amazed at the number of entrepreneurs with access to money when they see this kind of opportunity, how many of them are going after these. I'm sure in Brazil that's happening. I'm sure in China that's happening as well. So worldwide, when people see nonlinear change and the opportunity to change something, that's going to happen. Take 3D printing, for example. That's an area where you have the costs have come down over 250 times in the last decade in terms of how long it takes to get, how much it takes to get a unit printed. So if you have a lot of prototyping, if you have a lot of tools and fixtures, and then even some low volume end use components, 10 years ago, your options were CNC machines and a very long process to kind of get it. But today, 3D printing is very much a reality that can be used very extensively across your design process, and that could speed things up quite a bit. I was talking to a consumer goods company the other day, one of Siemens' customers, and they said that their whole product line, they used to make, their product life cycles were over 5 years. They used to make, 20% of their revenue from products introduced this year, another 40–50% from products from the 2 years prior to that, and then some of the older product lines were making money. But over the last 5 years, they've gotten to a point now where 90% of their revenues are being made from products introduced in the last 12 months. So the speed with which they're being asked to renew the product life cycles, to keep up with trends, and to go very quickly from concept to production to retooling to immediate next concept and production. Many of the traditional assumptions that they're making don't apply. So when these kind of nonlinear changes go in the industry, you're going to see a lot of different possibilities come up. And that's what I think there's the opportunity for incumbents to innovate and catch up and kind of go hard after these kinds of changes and see how they can redefine their businesses. But there's also certainly an opportunity for new entrants and entrepreneurs to kind of find opportunities and redefine the way things are done. Okay, so I'll give you some example, the way we look at it from a Siemens Next 47 perspective. I'm going to go through 3 different areas that we serve in this industry and commercial, energy, and then infrastructure. I'll give you some ideas of how we look at it. The way we look at it is we say, okay, what could be possible? You know, what are the big meta trends that are moving and shaping these particular end markets? What are the kinds of startups that are going after these kinds of opportunities, and what are the underlying technology drivers? So I'm going to click through a little bit more to show you more of the slide here. Yeah, so this is kind of the picture I'm talking about. So the first we start to conceive, okay, what could change in our industry? And I'm going to pick something here, the last one, which is cybersecurity. So you think about industrial processes, and you think about the adoption of sensors, you think about the adoption of collecting data from these sensors and using compute to change your actions about how things work. You know, the oil well example that I was thinking about. But all of a sudden, that becomes a cyber target, you know, and this level of connectivity and automation may not have been possible before. So, but if you look forward a decade, you need to think about this really becomes a cyber target, and how do I protect myself there? So the security practices and things that you are used to in the past will definitely not be adequate with this rate of change and this kind of adoption of endpoints and proliferation of connectivity. So the way we think about it from an X47 Siemens perspective is, okay, how does that world change? How are these endpoints going to react? What are the risks that it creates? And then we start to look at what are the startups that are addressing that problem. Then, you know, from an X47 perspective, we really try to engage with these startups, try to understand where they're coming from, how they address, and then we try to learn, partner, you know, embrace these things as we go to our end customers. So the other examples that I have here about the supply chain becoming more digitalized, and then certainly local production. I talked about this consumer goods company where 90% of their products or their revenues are coming from products in the last 12 months. Guess what? Then one of the big assumptions that's changing for them is that their goods are not going to be made in factories in low-cost countries anymore, because the cycle time between the amount of time that the goods were in ships was just not going to get them fast enough to the cycle times that they needed. So they needed to go from large centralized factories to very distributed factories and local production. And this could, more and more of industry could kind of operate this way. You know, we've lived for 30, almost 50 years, maybe even, about labor arbitrage, moving production to the lowest cost areas and using automation. Now, a lot of that production could come back and come back into local production. So we're looking at innovations that go that way. And I think for all of us in the industry, that would be a good way to look at that problem. Similarly, in energy, it's the same kind of paradigm as we look at it. We're going from, you know, the penetration of electric cars that's kind of happening right before our eyes. As that takes shape, what changes? You know, gas stations be replaced by charging stations. If those electric cars become autonomous, what happens to vehicle ownership? I think, you know, many of us know this intuitively. On average, when we have cars, these cars are utilized less than 10% of their useful time with us. I think it's in advanced countries, it's like 4%, and other areas, it's like 6%. 6%, 4% utilization of a capital asset, you know, brings into question, why do we own it? You know, of course, we all love our cars, and we love, you know, it's kind of becomes a personal thing that we use. But if it were really much more convenient to have an autonomously driven electric car come your way, that's far more energy efficient. It was also far more capital efficient, and it's a better way to provide transportation. So that could very well be a set of technologies and enablers that get us to that point. And we're seeing, of course, there, I've put a selection of startups there. These could be the number of startups that could kind of take us there, and a lot more entrepreneurship and startups and innovations required to kind of get us to that end state that's already starting to become possible. And the other thing I talked about is the net producers point that I have here. The concept there, as many of us are seeing, is that a solar has kind of taken shape. The old model of producing electricity centrally and shipping it to remote locations, is already changing dramatically in front of our eyes. I think in the EU, there's a mandate now that all new buildings that are getting built, larger commercial buildings, have to become energy independent. If that's the case, you very much have the capacity to generate electricity going from large power plants and turbines and those kinds of projects to very, very decentralized in CapEx inside of commercial buildings to actually produce electricity that they need to store and to go. And that big paradigm is enabled by a set of technologies like we talked about, from solar to batteries to sensors, connectivity, and a way to transact locally as opposed to the utility model that all of us are used to today. Similarly, I talked a little bit about the vehicle ownership problem in our infrastructure. One of the things about, with the rise of drones that we're seeing is that, the local last mile of logistics and delivery could change dramatically from the way it is today. Instead of truck rolls, it could be drones. When we talk about cities, smart cities, and making cities safer, it could very much be, instead of hiring more police, which is the response today, all our politicians promise that, you could very much have a different paradigm where you would have cameras and drones and local, you could use AI to recognize the movement of people. It raises a lot of questions about privacy and so on, but at the same time, our approach to how we provide security and safety and deliver last mile logistics could change dramatically over the next 10 years. And there's a set of people that are approaching the problem. The underlying technologies are ready for us to go in that direction, and we could very much see ourselves heading in that direction. I think I'll kind of cover that. So I wanted to leave a little bit, the last point that I wanted to make is about what I'm doing here with Siemens and Next 47. So Next 47 is an innovation unit of Siemens, and we share the heritage with Siemens in that the name Next 47 comes from the fact that Siemens was founded in 1847, and this is about what entrepreneurs always ask, what's coming next? So we put it together to create Next 47. But more importantly, the underlying idea of Next 47 is to recognize that we've gone from the technology-based innovation era to more industry disruption. And for Siemens to innovate, we innovate every day across our R&D organization. We innovate every day in the way we serve customers. But Next 47 adds to that capability by being external-facing division or a unit that looks at the best ideas that are happening externally. And we do three things when we interface with external innovation. The first thing we do is capital, or we invest. We invest in what we think are the best companies or that have the most potential to create categories or disrupt categories. So that's called capital, and we have a global team. Across Next 47, we have a global team across Asia, Europe, and North America to do this. The second thing we do is called Catalyst, and we're not just investing in new innovations. Siemens is embracing them, so Next 47 brings the best ideas that we see in the market into Siemens, and also through Siemens to our customers. One of the reasons I'm here in Brazil is to work with the local team of Siemens here in Brazil to help have the interchange of ideas of what innovations they're seeing in the market, what we're seeing globally, and finding the best possible way to take it to customers inside Brazil and inside industry in Brazil that can actually benefit from it. So that's the second thing we do. And the third thing we do, all these three things are interconnected, is the idea of business creation. As I mentioned before, there are a set of barriers inside corporate as we think about new disruptive innovation that comes in to bring that in and to create a new business. So inside of Next 47, we are creating new businesses. We start them ourselves through ideas from inside Siemens, or we bring in ideas from outside, and we grow these businesses inside of Next 47, inside an environment that's separate from a regular corporate environment, that fosters the innovation and allows it to go through the early stages of development and getting established in the market. And that's the third part of what we do. So it's capital, catalyst, and create. And that's kind of our approach to go attack external innovation. So I think that's all I had for you today. Hopefully, just to do a quick recap, the world of external innovation has changed quite a bit. As I said before, the scale and the scope of the ideas that are being tested in the external innovation market are at a scale where you cannot ignore it, and it's actually driving change faster than we can think about. Then we think about the world of industry. A lot of these changes, technological changes that we're seeing are intersecting with opportunities inside of industry. So over the next 10 years, a lot of the assumptions that we are used to and the way we used to work, the product life cycles, how we work, the business model, how our customers operate are all going to change. And we have an opportunity right in front of us to kind of embrace it and to see and to be part of what could be possible next. And then the last thought I left you with is that what our approach is to this changing landscape as Siemens and as Next 47. Thank you.